Have a beef with something you heard? Looking for a little extra side dish? Let us know on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at The Feed Podcast.
Still not full? Feast on the photos, recipes, and be a part of the conversation on Twitter at The Feed Podcast.
I know if you ask chefs which element of the restaurant experience is the most important, they'd probably say food, but I'm guessing the owners would put service up there as just as important, right?
I think everybody puts all three things at the top. That's food, ambiance, and service.
Okay.
And then for the success of the restaurant, it also has to include location, because
Right.
you can put a really great restaurant in an out-of-the-way location, and it may or may not do really well. But I think that you have to always take that triple threat: food, service, and ambiance.
How have you evolved your service, your education about service over the years? Because you've expanded and you've got new different restaurants and times have changed, and
We've always been super service oriented, especially when it comes to any kind of education. So we do a massive amount. We have a class every single day in all of our restaurants, and that's kind of the hallmark of who we are, because the food that we do has a story. And if the guests don't get the story, then we're not doing our job as restaurateurs. Then it becomes about, do you like it or do you not like it? But once you understand the story that's behind it, you're going to be more open to it. So all of our service staff has to really understand who we are, what we're working with in terms of ingredients and traditions and classic dishes that we put out there. So every day we have a class in something in our restaurant.
And is that like before family meal? Is it a half hour? Like when does that happen?
It happens right before service starts in the evening. And I know a lot of people do their pre-shift meetings and they just talk about what the special is, or maybe who, if you're lucky, who's coming in that night, or how many people are on the books, or who's in what stations and all that. That amounts to about 3 minutes of our pre-shift, because we want to launch right into what we think is the most valuable information for us to get to our guests through our service staff.
All right, well, coming up on today's show, service. How to hire, train staff, and deliver it with the utmost grace and professionalism. We'll talk with the founder of one of the most successful restaurant groups in the country, and spend time behind the bar with a successful bar manager on a busy night, and finally, shadow a server and floor captain at one of the world's best restaurants. Stay with us. We're happy to make special arrangements, accommodate dietary restrictions, and do whatever we can to ensure you have a pleasant listening experience today. This is The Feed Podcast. I'm Steve Dolinsky, a food and travel reporter at ABC 7 News, the Chicago Tribune, and Canada's Globe and Mail.
And I'm Rick Bayless, the chef and owner of Chicago's Frontera Grill, Topolobampo Xoco Leña Brava, and host of Public Television's Mexico, One Plate at a Time.
And every week, The Feed takes a deep dive into the world of professional chefs, restaurateurs, food artisans, and drink experts, sharing their stories and uncovering their passion for food and drink. But that's not all. Rick and I are always traveling the globe for our jobs, eating, drinking, and immersing ourselves in local culture. And if we find something exciting along the way, you can be sure it's going to find its way here to our James Beard Award-winning podcast. Since today's show is all about service, we figured we'd go straight to the top, and by the top I mean the guy who literally wrote the book on the subject. Danny Meyer opened Union Square Cafe in New York City in 1985, where it took the top spot in the Zagat Guide for many years. His company, Union Square Hospitality Group, eventually gave birth to Gramercy Tavern, Blue Smoke, Marta, The Modern, and many others, not to mention a catering arm, consulting, and a little burger concept called Shake Shack you might have heard of. The company has garnered nearly 30 James Beard Awards, and Meyer has literally, as I said, written the book on the subject with Setting the Table, the Transforming Power of Hospitality in Business. And we are thrilled to welcome St. Louis Cardinals fan Danny Meyer to the show today. Danny, thanks for being here.
Welcome, Danny.
Thank you. Does being a St. Louis Cardinal fan mean I disqualify any of your listeners from wanting to hear me?
We want to tap into our Midwestern audience.
Yeah.
They would really appreciate the fact that you're from the heartland.
At least you're from the heartland and not from someplace else, but Cardinals, I don't know.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for being here today. You wrote this book several years ago, and a lot of it comes from a term you use about enlightened hospitality. Can you explain that?
Yeah, enlightened hospitality is just a name that we give to a virtuous cycle that, in the same way that Rick knows that you can have the best recipe in the world, but it's never, ever going to taste any better than the worst ingredient you put into it. And even if you get the best ingredient, it's never going to taste any better than how well you handled that and cared for it before the cooking process. I think we came to the same conclusion that hospitality, the way you make people feel, that's the recipe, but it'll never taste any better than the ingredients, also known as employees, staff members. And your staff members will never do a better job than how they feel treated themselves. So it really kind of is a way just to name that if you actually want to have the happiest guests, you better make your guests second, and you better make your own staff your first customer. And if your staff members are psyched about coming into work, it's generally going to translate into happier diners in the dining room.
I am so happy to hear you say that, because that has been our mantra for so many years. And a lot of people don't really understand that. They think that you're putting on some sort of show when you're in the dining room. But I think you have to build it from the back. You have to have all of the employees feel like that they are being so well taken care of, that they have had a bar set super high that then they are going to share with the guests that come in. But I have a quick question for you. And
can I interrupt you before your question? I'm just going to interrupt because I've learned an important lesson over these years, that it's true that a huge part of this is how we treat the people working for us. That's where it all starts. And if that's not there, then it all ends. But I've also learned that a huge part of my responsibility is to hold our staff members accountable for how they treat each other.
Yeah.
And that is just as potent as how they feel treated by me.
Yes, I agree.
Rick, by the way, after Rick's question, I want to ask you for a specific example of what you're talking about. But
let's go on with that.
Because you talk about this and it sounds great on paper, but I want to know, can you give us a concrete example of how you do that with your staff?
How you do which part of it?
How you
hold them accountable, or how we take care of them?
I'm sorry, how you take care of them?
Well, I mean, it really starts with the pie and how you divvy up the pie. There's no question that the restaurant industry is challenged in terms of margin. There's only so many dollars you can charge, and for your guests, because even if you're the best, as Rick is, there's another 15 or 20,000 restaurants in a big city that people could otherwise go to, so you just can't charge that much. But meanwhile, your landlord is not necessarily challenged. They can continue to charge more.
Rick is smiling.
Yes.
The cost of doing business on a per-hour basis continues to go up. Commodities continue to go up. Insurance goes up. Everything goes up except our prices can't. But then you go, well, how am I going to divvy that up, and where am I going to prioritize things? And I do think that there are operators who say, despite all those challenges, we are still going to provide health coverage for all of our employees. We are still going to provide parental leave, so that if somebody has a baby, whether it's the birth mother or the partner or the spouse, we're gonna pay them for significant time off. Of course, we're not going to wait for the government to tell us we need to create sick pay. We're going to do that on our own. In our case, we are also working with the elimination of tipping, because we think that is a contributor to a number of issues, whether it's guest-driven sexual harassment, or whether it's the inability to schedule your time appropriately for your family. One of the things we learned with the tipping system means that the only way to get a raise is to work Friday and Saturday nights. But what if that's the only night you can see your kid? So we're constantly looking for things that we can do financially to make this industry more professional. And that's probably the single biggest thing we can do, on top of lots and lots of education. I think a lot of us look to Rick as a beacon for staff education. I think the annual trips that you've taken your staff to in Mexico is an amazing vote of interest. When you take an interest in your staff members, they will take an interest in you.
That's for sure. Now, you had mentioned about holding your staff accountable for how they treat each other. And my guess, the first thing that popped in my mind, because we've been hearing so much about sexual misconduct, sexual harassment in the workplace, and with reference to restaurant kitchens. And there is a certain image that a lot of restaurant kitchens have out in the general public's mind. But I have worked doing special dinners and so forth in a number of your kitchens. And to me, they were just the epitome of professionalism. And my guess is that when you were referring to holding your employees accountable for how they treat each other, that's what you were referring to, is how you create that really professional environment where they can literally take care of each other, and that there isn't a sense of any kind of harassment going on.
Well, that's certainly the goal, and I think the word professional is really what it's all about. I think our industry, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, is one of the best in the world when it comes to having a low bar for starting. If you've got a hospitality heart and a work ethic and kind eyes, we'll hire you and we'll start you somewhere. I think what our industry has not been great at is providing a professional path towards financial and professional growth. And we're learning a lot, I think, with the whole Me Too movement. It's not just about chefs misbehaving and restaurateurs misbehaving. I think it's also about, we're learning power, and we're learning that it's about people being kept in their place, whether it's
so you mentioned,
gender.
You mentioned that if you have a hospitality heart, you'll hire somebody. Do you feel that you're hiring people that already come with that, or is there, in your way of thinking, an opportunity to take somebody and create that person with a great hospitality heart?
No, I don't think you can. I think people come wired with the hospitality, or they don't. I do believe, however, that more people than not actually are wired to be happier themselves when they made other people feel better. But perhaps in their last job, that wasn't valued. And so they come to work for us, and, they've been taught their whole life that it's all about, what were the accomplishments that can be measured, which tend to be numbers. And they don't come to us understanding that we think even more than half of their success is based on how they made other people feel. Right. So while I don't believe that you can train someone who otherwise is not wired to have what we call a high HQ, a high hospitality quotient, I do believe that by championing and celebrating people for their hospitality accomplishments just as much as you do for their financial accomplishments, whether they be sales or whether they be saving money as a food cost or whatever, I think when those things are celebrated, the whole organization benefits, because everybody sees that's who I have to be if I'm going to succeed in this business.
I have one more question for you, Danny. You guys have led the charge across the country, at least in terms of this hospitality included. You talked about earlier. Tip, everything's included, so there's no arguing at the end of the meal. There's no incentive for anybody to do anything during the meal. It's all included. I'm curious, how has that impacted or affected the servers' attitudes on the floor as well as the customers?
It's two very, very different questions you're asking. The servers who worked for many, many years with the understanding that they were primarily working for tips kind of split two different ways. Some of them said, I like the tips because it gives me a chance to hopefully be free of responsibility. I'm basically working one customer at a time. And when we made the switch, I'd say about half of them were thrown by that. And I'd say the other half of them said, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Of the ones who were thrown by it at the beginning, it could be that 25% of them converted and they now love it, and 75% of them might have left the company within the first year of the transition because, to be fair, the entire economic basis on which they joined the company shifted at that point. The people who joined after we made the move came to the business in many cases specifically because of it, and they've been thrilled because they love removing the dynamic between being a server and the guest, where the server is wondering, does the guest think I'm only being nice to them in hopes that they're going to empty their wallet after 2 hours, or do they not understand that I'm doing this because as a professional, I actually want them to be happy, and I'm not actually only being nice to somebody in hopes that I'll get a big tip. So they love losing that. They love being able to have a schedule that meets their life as opposed to a schedule that meets which shifts have the biggest tips. As far as guests are concerned, the first time we introduced this, which was back in the fall of 2015, there were a few guests who said, how am I ever going to get good service absent the threat of leaving a bad tip? And I never understood that, because those people believed that the only reason people were being nice is because of the tipping system, and that absent the tip, maybe people wouldn't be nice to them, or maybe people would leave their food in the kitchen to get cold and not bring it to them. And I would say that has completely gone away. We never hear about that. The only thing we hear about as of right now is, and now we've been doing this for over 2 years, not in all of our restaurants, because we've been phasing it in every 4 or 5 months we add a new restaurant. But the only thing we hear is that the first time you experience this as a guest, the menu prices look a little bit high to your eye, because they're higher. Then when you get your bill and you realize that there is no line to leave a tip, and you sign your name, all of a sudden this entire experience starts to make sense. It feels like a good value because you're not adding another 20 or 21%. You realize, oh my gosh, that I actually got my food on time. It didn't take a tip to get my food on time. It didn't take a tip to have someone be nice to me. I didn't have to buy my coat back at the coat check at the end of the meal. So we've had actually a huge amount of positive reinforcement from our guests. And finally, my biggest fear going into this was, how do we make this all work financially? Because if we're paying our cooks more money, which was a big part of why we did this, if we are doing the best job we can to keep our formerly tipped employees whole relative to what they used to make, and we're trying not to charge so much money that the menu scares you away from even coming to the restaurant, how are we going to have enough money left for our investors to feel good about it? And I will say that it's been a very, very challenging process, but even that is catching up in a big way, because every single year since we've done this, minimum wage has gone up throughout state by state by state, and we are completely immune from those minimum wage hikes because we're paying so much more than minimum wage anyway. So as other restaurants are now raising their prices to keep up with minimum wage, which is no longer an issue for us, you the customer, are now tipping on a higher menu price, and all of a sudden our prices, which include everything, are now starting to look pretty normal.
Yeah. Listen, I always learn so much talking to you,
too.
and I wish we had more time, but we're going to let you go. Danny Meyer is the CEO of Union Square Hospitality Group in New York. Danny, thanks again for taking some time to talk with us.
Thanks, Danny.
Good to talk with the both of you. Thanks.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Coming up next, a night behind the stick with the bar manager at Billy's Sunday, who shares some of her expertise gained from spending many nights face-to-face with the customer. Then later, I shadow a floor captain at Alinea for the first half of service and learn what it takes to be on the floor of one of the world's best restaurants. Stay with us.
See behind-the-scenes photos and get additional information before other listeners. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/thefeedpodcast.
Arrive at the meal late? Check out previous episodes, get recipes from ingredient challenges, and see behind-the-scenes pictures at thefeedpodcast.com.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Now, Rick, you don't really have a bar at Topolobampo, but you do at Frontera and La Brava.
Right.
How do you train bartenders?
We train bartenders the way we train servers, because I think that a bartender really is a server. So not only are we training them in the steps of service, but also in who we are and what the character of being in a Frontera restaurant is all about.
I would think, kind of like what Danny Meyer was talking about, you kind of have to hire the right personality, because this person is really on the front lines in front of a lot of people face-to-face at the bar, all like the whole shift.
Well, they are, and they're interacting with the guest in a different way than, say, a server is, because a server will come to your table and then leave, and you're not sitting or standing right there with the person. So a bartender has to be able to love the interaction over a longer period of time with the guest and making the guest feel special in a different kind of way. And of course, a lot of people, when they're singles and they want to have dinner in a good place, they'll go sit at the bar because they have a dining companion then with that bartender.
Do those people have to start out as barbacks or servers, or do you just hire them as bartenders?
It has been our experience that people that want to work in a bar want to work in a bar, and they rarely will go back and forth between being a server and being a bartender. I don't know. There's just something. It's like pastry chefs and savory chefs. Rarely do they cross back and forth. You just have a propensity one thing or another.
Although you started out in pastry.
I did.
Okay. I spent some time with the bar manager at Billy's Sunday here in Chicago one night, just being a fly in the wall, trying to learn the difference between being simply a drink maker and a hospitality provider.
How's your night going? It's great.
Stephanie Andrews is the bar manager at Billy's Sunday, a neighborhood cocktail bar in Chicago's Logan Square.
Down for the count. I'm so glad you had a chance to get some rest. So
She's been the manager here the last 10 months, but has been bartending for nearly 3 years. Her ability to perceive customers' needs has been sharpened by her experience.
So you can always tell when they come in after a long day, they just want to talk about it, they want to grab a cocktail, and they just want to kind of forget about what they went through earlier and then get on with their night and get it started the right way.
How do you read the customer? I'm guessing sometimes people don't want to have a chat, and some people probably do want to just shoot the breeze, or they're just waiting for a friend. Like, how do you read them?
Body language, I think, is the first way to go about it. Eye contact, or if they're a little bit more open, a little more closed. And just how they kind of order their drink. If, they kind of want more from you, then you can go further with it. If they order their drink, put it away, and kind of maybe go into their phone or kind of turn away, then you kind of can dictate how you're going to go forward with the guest.
If they go into their phone, doesn't everybody go into their phone? I mean, aren't they all reading something or texting somebody at the same time?
Not necessarily, but and you do find the people with the books and things like that. So, but a lot of people now, they'll put their phone, face down, they'll have their cocktail, and they kind of actually want to engage and talk to you about what they're drinking. Why is it so different than the last cocktail they had?
A big part of the job is making recommendations, always trying to meet someone's expectations.
My favorite right now is the Advice from a Narwhal. I think it's very seasonally appropriate and really fun on the presentation side of things. Are you guys doing all right on cocktails? Awesome.
I don't know, whatever, like something boozy, bitter,
Yeah, the deep dark. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so one thing I just noticed, unlike servers who work in restaurants who can just describe things on the menu and then deliver food, you're actually working. You're actually creating something behind the bar. You're stirring, you're tasting with the straw, you're adding ice, you're presenting, you're garnishing while you're having a conversation. That's got to be difficult.
Yeah, the multitasking was definitely a learned technique for me, especially not being on this side of things for a very long time. I really had to kind of pick and choose the way that I made my movements, and so maintaining the conversation was actually the most difficult for me. I was a really great worker, but not really great with the interaction until I became more comfortable with, just setting the tone for the evening.
I can't imagine that's natural for anybody. So how long does it take to sort of get over that hump where you feel comfortable?
I think I'm still getting comfortable with it because, it's a new face and a new person every single day. So just kind of getting to know them in such a quick amount of time. But just you just have to be comfortable and be yourself, because at the end of the day, they're here for what you're going to provide with them, and they're here for the experience.
And unlike servers who can go back to the kitchen and sort of turn off the smile, you've always got to have a smile up here. I mean, you're standing here on stage, basically. There are 15 people sitting here at this bar right now looking at you.
Yep. And so you got to make sure you have it buttoned up a little bit, have the smile on, and just, because you want them to feel like you're welcoming them into your home. You don't want, if you have this kind of grumpy-esque about you, they're going to be like, maybe I should go down the street and have a cocktail there. It doesn't feel as warm and as cozy.
Does that translate into tippage or not tippage?
I would assume so, but that's not always on my mind when a guest sits down. I want to make sure that I'm just giving them exactly what they're looking for, whether it's just a good handshake, whether it's a smile, or whether it's like the best old fashioned they've ever had. The whole point we're here is for hospitality and to really create something for a guest that they can't create for themselves. So,
is there a training program then within this company, Folk Art Hospitality? Do they train intensely?
Oh, absolutely. Not only we do still once a week educations with our staff, but previously we have kind of dove face deep with the Amaro, with service standards, with every aspect of what you could expect coming into this place. And as a bartender, it's very, very intense, whether it's technique, whether it's education, whether it's just like theory.
How often? Every day? I mean, how much time are you spending on doing the education and the training?
And you should be teaching yourself every day, whether it's reading a little snippet, whether it's like correcting yourself on your own technique. But as a staff, we do it once a week. So on Thursdays, we meet together. Like tomorrow, we're doing an agave training so we can learn the ins and outs of agave, mezcal, tequila. We'll do Amaro. We'll do just like mock service, just to make sure that we all are kind of on the same page and dancing together when it comes to service.
You guys are kind of known for your Fernet, right?
Yeah.
What is Fernet, and why is that your thing here?
Fernet is a style of Amaro. It's a bitter Italian liqueur, usually notes of like eucalyptus and menthol, things like that. For us, it was a chance to kind of taste a piece of history. So Alex Bachman, who opened this bar, taught us tons. He had a fascination with terroir. I do as well. I think it's really prominent in Amaro. So we kind of translated that idea into the bottle and gave us a chance to taste a little piece of history.
Had a guy who said, basically dealer's choice, but you also had some guys here on the end of the bar who were sort of like focused on scotch or bourbon. That's really important in terms of, you really got to know your stuff back here.
You do. You have to, I think education, again, is very, very important, because if you are not well educated, you can't really give the guests exactly what they're looking for.
Some guy was asking about, Knob Creek and Makers, and you're like, well, we don't do that. Those are Beam products, I'm guessing, right? But you've got, you use like, was it Weller or something? It's a little bit more esoteric.
Oh, so yeah, so we can kind of see what they're looking to drink, and we can kind of gravitate towards something that's going to be similar, has similar flavor profiles, but utilizing what we have available on our back bar. We work really closely with like the KVD who makes Willet, so it's like beautiful bourbons. We can kind of educate them on trying something new. Maybe they haven't heard of it.
So would you role play then when you're practicing with your staff? Like, okay, if somebody asks for this kind of thing, we can go with this kind of thing instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we always give examples. So especially when we're educating on Scotch, we give like a high end or a low end price. I shouldn't say low end, but like kind of that mid range, something that's approachable versus something that's like pretty extravagant and fun. And then we taste it and talk about flavor profiles. We talk about price points, and then we talk about what would be similar to if you were to think about a larger conglomerate brand versus some of these like single casts and things like that, how they're really similar.
Go ahead and shake. I know you're waiting to shake that. I don't want to let it dilute too much. Okay, so what are you going to make for the guy who just said dealer's choice?
I'm going to do something more on the bitter and boozy side. When I make a dealer's choice, I usually try to tend to start with like a classic cocktail and then riff on it. So swapping out an ingredient, adding something that's going to be a little more unique, but still kind of maintaining the integrity of what the classic cocktail would be.
It was like really perfectly cooked and hot, and like it was awesome.
How do you enjoy your cocktail?
Delicious, very good. What's in it?
So there's some bourbon, a little bit of Fernet, part Amaro, a little bit of aromatic bitters, touch of orange oil in there to kind of brighten it up. So it's a rich, bitter, boozy sipper.
Really, really good. Really, the Fernet is awesome.
I wish people could see what I'm seeing, because as you're having this conversation with me, sort of very casual, you're going in the refrigerator, you're grabbing some eggs, you're cracking the eggs, you're now doing a dry shake right now with one hand. You were just doing a little bit of a garnish with a peeler. Now you're going in for the ice. Are those Hojizaki ice cubes?
They sure are. Nice ice really makes the cocktail.
1-inch ice cubes. Not quite as much dilution. Now she's going in, getting a glass. She had to look into the light to make sure there was no mark or fingerprint on the glass. The shake, that was a quick shake. And then she's going to do a little taste with the straw. I'm the play-by-play guy. And now the strainer. And this is obviously very frothy because there's egg white in there.
Absolutely. It adds a nice texture to the cocktail.
How many different types of drinks do you have to memorize?
I would say hundreds, because you have, old menu options, and then you also have classic cocktails, and then you have new menu items. And then you always want to keep like a Rolodex of like dealer's choices that you can kind of pull out when you're in the midst of busy Saturday night service. You can be like, this one's going to work, this one's going to work.
If somebody comes in with like just a bizarre request, do you have to look it up on your phone?
It's a great tool if need be, but we always try to, keep it kind of rolling. And if someone comes with a bizarre request, we try to accommodate as best as possible, and then just kind of how we can move and groove around it to give them what they would like.
How do you deal with, do you want to garnish this, or can I ask you the question? Okay, you've got a microplane in your hand. I'm guessing you're going to do a little
nutmeg.
Nutmeg, of course. But what is this?
This is the advice from a narwhal. We're actually smoking it with some fig wood from Seedling Farms. It adds almost like that campfire aroma to the cocktail.
God, are we in Brooklyn? What the hell? Okay, this is craft cocktail at its finest here. So you're infusing it with a little bit of the aroma and the smoke. I've seen this before.
It's actually served in this cute little Billy Sunday nesting doll, so the guests get that when they arrive.
That is great. What a great service piece. Now, what do you do with the difficult customer? Because that's got to happen frequently in a bar.
I shouldn't say a customer is necessarily ever difficult. They're unsure, and so it's just really giving them a sense of comfort in the space and trying to figure out what's going to get them there.
Because like the person who comes in and wants a Cosmo or a vodka tonic or I don't know, something with Stoli, not going to happen.
Absolutely. Well, there's no rules in drinking, so drink what you'd like to drink. But I always like to suggest something to get them started that's not necessarily that. If we have fresh spiced cranberry, what can we do with that that's going to be really similar to the Cosmo? Maybe give them an experience they haven't had before. But I will never say no to making a cocktail if it's exactly what the guest would like to drink.
Like you had a guest earlier I was referring to who wanted bourbon or scotch, and you happen to have something that was like a 12-year, which is probably much more age than they were accustomed to.
Yeah.
So you just steer them in a different direction.
I do.
With a smile.
With a smile. Steer them in the direction that I think will best be suited for what they're looking for.
It's got to be a bit of an ego boost. You ask people, how was everything, and they just keep smiling and shaking their heads like, this is great, this is awesome. What happens when you don't get that response? I mean, it's got to be difficult. It
does, because you kind of figure out where you went wrong and try to figure out how you can fix the mistake. But, you have to remember that not everyone's palate's the same, so what you might like or what the person sitting down the bar might like is not going to be the same, as the person that just walked in. So it's kind of, I shouldn't say a game, but
you got to think on the fly.
Absolutely, nonstop. It's always go, go, go. Because you never know what's going to be written on that ticket. You never know what the request coming out of someone's mouth is going to be. So you just have to be ready for anything. So I'm really good at running up and down those stairs too for anything I need to grab last minute.
But better that you don't have 150 seats here. You've only got a limited number, so you can make changes on the fly here. You don't have to rush to get drinks out.
Which I like. I like the quaint environment in this place because we can really get cozy and we can really get close to the guests and really have that one-on-one conversation and really, almost like nerd out, especially when you open that good book up and there's like a list of 100 for and they're like, what the hell? And it's like, let's talk about it. Let's like really dive deep together. So it's fun for me because I get to show them something they never had, and then I learn something new from them too usually. So it's a really fun experience.
All right, thanks so much. When we come back, a night on the floor at Alinea, where I get to see firsthand how the magic happens and what servers do to read their guests' moods. We'll be right back.
Be a part of the culinary conversation by following us on Facebook/The Feed Podcast.
Arrive at the meal late? Check out previous episodes, get recipes from ingredient challenges, and see behind-the-scenes pictures at thefeedpodcast.com.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Dining in Michelin-starred restaurants can go one of two ways. It's either stifling with boredom, servers taking everything way too seriously, or just the opposite, with suited servers actually being relaxed and being themselves.
Yeah.
Do you find that?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of stuffy service at all.
Who is?
I don't know, but there is this tradition out there, a very, very stuffy service where the server never cracks a smile. When I go into a place that has that style of service, the first thing I want to do is get him to crack. I'll say a joke, or I'll say something that might be like a little bit too personal with the server, just to see if I can get them to get out of that. But a lot of them will be reprimanded if they're seen with that kind of service. But I think a lot of that is going away now. It used to be more common in the really high-end fine dining places, but I don't think so much anymore.
There is a more casualization, I think, of service and of restaurants. But, when I go to a place like that, and we've talked about like the places that are on the 50 best list in these far-flung countries, they coddle their guests. They really take care of the guests. The food isn't always so amazing, but I think the guests want to be coddled and taken care of. I want to have fun.
I do too. I want to have fun. And sometimes the servers in those places that are extremely lauded will want to have this experience for the guests where they're telling about all the people that have been involved in the preparation of this dish, or where the ingredients came from, and that sort of stuff. And I had the opportunity to go to Mugaritz in near San Sebastian, and the service started off kind of stuffy and weird. And then the sommelier came around, and he knew I wanted to experience the whole thing. So he kept bringing over these beers that were made by local brewers and just pouring a little taste of it in a glass. I think you're going to like this thing. And we just melted because it went from that stuffy to that personal without it just being overblown,
Yep.
And then I loved, and to tell you the truth, I liked the food better after he started engaging our table.
Because you were half in the bag. Yeah. All right, I was curious about how a staff at a high-end restaurant deals with customers, especially with guests who might have quite complicated needs. So I reached out.
Which describes more and more of our guests.
Yes, that'll be another show, by the way. So I reached out to Grant Achatz and Nick Kokonis at Alinea and arranged with their director of operations, Gary Obligacion, to spend the early part of service one night on the floor with one of their floor captains, so I could see firsthand how they interact with guests who are paying no less than $150 a head.
Awesome. Is this your first time dining with us?
It is. I'm flying from Houston.
Awesome. Cool, and it's a 30th anniversary celebration for you as well?
Devin McKinney is a floor manager and sommelier at Alinea. He started in the kitchen as a chef de partie in 2011. That's a line cook in charge of a particular area. He then moved to the front of the house and ran food for about 6 months. When the expediter's job opened up, he moved there for 3 years, but eventually moved back out onto the floor.
I did just want to triple check in terms of allergies or aversions. We didn't have anything noted for you. Everything's fair game?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I'm a bit worried then, yeah.
It's something that I've always enjoyed doing. I mean, throughout high school, I kind of went back and forth between front and back of the house. I love that aspect in culinary school as well, so I've always kind of had a passion for it, and I think seeing guest reaction at a restaurant like this it's amazing. It makes the job fun.
When you say a restaurant like this, everybody's paid ahead of time on talk, so you're not going to be handing bills to anybody at the end of the night, so that's sort of taken care of. Does that take some pressure off?
It definitely does. I think at least once a week somebody makes it kind of a comment of, oh, I paid for this 2 months ago. Like, it's that total relaxation. It's kind of like buying a sporting ticket in advance or a theater ticket, that sort of thing, when all you really have to do is dress up and show up, and then everything's a surprise, that sort of thing.
The other thing about a restaurant like this is that it's a very special occasion destination. Every table out here, I think, was a first-time visit. There's a 30th anniversary, there was a special birthday. So what does that bring to the experience of interacting with the guests? Because they're not just here like on a Tuesday, they're going to have a burger. They're going to have like a major special event.
I think in each case, it's very different. In the case of the 30th anniversary, they're traveling here, which is very, very common. We're definitely a destination. So there's that element of travel. They could have easily had a flight delay, sat in traffic, that sort of thing. So it's always important to not only acknowledge the special occasion that someone's making to a restaurant like this, but just to engage them and feel what they're looking for.
So how do you read that table? Because some people want to be engaged and some want to be left alone, I think.
I think the telltale sign, at least for me, having these word searches on the menu, it's something that Alinea classically has not done. When we reopened after the remodel, that was the first time that a menu would be placed on the table beforehand. Albeit it's a very vague menu, as I was alluding to earlier. There's words that could be wet snow or the Cape or an indigenous word in Australian for a specific type of crab that's only found there. Words that don't actually tell you about anything, but you can almost immediately tell when somebody immediately picks that up and is looking around for a pen that they might want a little bit more interaction. They might want a little bit more of that, like, inclusion of that special word into a description, or jokes and hints at something like that.
Of course, there's a challenge for service staff when the evening begins with restrictions. Unlike the table I saw with the chef from Miami, who was clearly giddy and stoked to be sitting with his date for their first visit to the restaurant, the Japanese couple had a number of restrictions.
With that in mind, I did just want to follow up on a few dietary restrictions that we had noted. We had a note that one of you would like to avoid any kind of seaweed tonights.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Absolutely. And that includes, but nori is okay for you?
Nori is okay for me. Actually, I'm a little allergic to the kelp.
To kelp?
Only kelp, not...
Only kelp?
Yeah.
Okay. But tosaka seaweed would be okay. Nori seaweed is acceptable.
Okay.
We do have a form called kombu seaweed that we use on the menu that's braised in soy sauce just as part of the preparation. Would you like us to avoid that preparation?
What?
It's called kombu, the style of seaweed that we'll be featuring tonight.
Maybe okay, I think.
Okay, we can go either way, whichever you're more comfortable with.
I think it should be no problem.
Okay, absolutely. And then for Evis, we had a note that we need to avoid onion tonight. Does that include raw onion or pickled onions, anything that might be used in preparations, or is it just...
It's fine. As long as it's not too much.
Okay, just something that would be visible or dominant we should avoid? Okay.
Just make sure not mix them with the food.
Yeah, of course.
Sometimes some restaurants like to cut them into small pieces and mix with the food.
I'll make sure that it's not a dominant flavor. We'll only use it in stocks or sauces, something along those lines. And we'll also avoid cilantro and coriander for you as well. Very cool.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Is there anything else that was not mentioned?
A lot of information ahead of time. One table has a lot of restrictions. No kelp, no coriander, no cilantro. But the kitchen knows that ahead of time. It's not like you're getting a curveball thrown to you just at the last second, right?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, there's always the possibility of having a party of 6. Maybe it's a business dinner. Somebody books the table for someone else and doesn't exactly know until the day of, the hour of, who's dining, which is a key component as to why we always follow up in person. We do a pretty extensive interview, both in email, correspondence with the guest, and then again in person, just to make sure.
McKinney says about a quarter of the guests have some type of restriction, so it's important to study up ahead of time. Part of that results in a thick notebook I notice he and his colleagues consulting with throughout the night. It sits dog-eared on a server station, tucked away in the corner.
We have kind of two different means of communication. We have in that it's essentially just a notebook with a tab for each table in the dining room. On the left-hand side is what we call a guest chit. Now, this is all the information that we've attained from the guest during the reservation process. So, and it has all the information from previous visits and talk if it applies. Previous visits, any special occasions noted, dietary restrictions, if they've pre-purchased wine pairings, that's all going to be in there. And then we take notes as well. You know, if the guest is left-handed, we'll make a note of that and we'll place a single utensil to their left-hand side so they don't have to reach across the table for it. If they like their glassware on their left-hand side, if they have a preference for a specific style of wine or a dislike for something like that. And then on the right-hand side is something that we fill out during each visit, and that has columns for any of their dietary restrictions. Again, if they are left-handed, if they're celebrating a birthday, we do a special presentation as part of the menu for that, as well as water preferences and pairings for them, because there is quite a bit going on, so we have that as kind of a reference point for the members of the team, so they don't have to ever ask the guests. Once they've told us once, that's all they need to tell us.
Is that information in your system if someone were to go to Royster, Aviary, the office next?
Yes, it is. It's through the Alinea Group talk.
A little big brother. It's a little bit like you know everything about them, but I guess from your perspective, you're try to make a good experience.
Yeah, it's a friendly big brother. Avocado puree, some tosaka seaweed, really crisp texture with that. It's finger food. You don't need to do anything with the lime that it's resting on.
The training is obviously paramount here. Imagine having to not only know the provenance of every ingredient, farmer, and source, but also the cooking technique, which can range from braising to sous vide. Just explaining the second course requires a 60-second description.
For this one, taking beautiful swordtip squid coming from the Tsukiji Fish Market in Tokyo. Very simple preparation with that squid. It's lightly scored and then saltwater poached. And it's garnished with the lemon and cayenne butter and some Japanese marigold flower petals. And so off to the side, an earthy component coming from black garlic and charred shallot. I like to incorporate a little bit of that darker puree with the squid, just because it adds this another level of complexity to the course. On your pile of rocks in the center of the table here, 2 of those rocks are actually edible. We take artichoke hearts that are braised in butter, that gets pureed down, and we dip that into your Niçoise olive and squid ink. If you look at the rocks here, 2 of those are a little bit shinier than the rest. Definitely use your fingers. A little tactile sensation. They're much softer than the rocks that they're sitting on top of. It'll be your first indicator as to which one to enjoy. Feel free to mix and match. Have this in any order that you like.
Okay. And then how much training typically goes into the service staff? You're you've obviously been here quite a while, but for someone to get on the floor here at Alinea, how much training do they have to do?
It's very case by case. We do a lot of drilling in terms of menu knowledge. We'll ask where a vendor is from, the story behind it. I think that is something that has always been integral into Alinea, is knowing the story behind Blease. Any special vendors that Chef Achatz has relationships with, where the ingredients are coming from, and knowing every single thing that goes into a course and knowing when and when not to use them is something that's very integral. So on a weekly basis, we're quizzing our staff, whether you've been here for a week or 10 years, everyone sees the quiz.
Because you're reciting a lot of information for every course.
We are, and the menu, while it doesn't change drastically every day, there might be a special herb or flower garnish that's changing that somebody might point to the first course that comes to a table and ask what something is. So it's very important for us to know, to be able to identify what these ingredients are, and for the same point, in terms of dietary restrictions, knowing which courses have tree nuts, which courses have dairy, shellfish, the list goes on. I think more than anything, something that I've learned here is that you can still be yourself and you can still have fun with guests as long as everything is technically sound. Make sure that you're not backhanding a guest, you present yourself open to them. Just noticing what people want, kind of going back to that. If it's a couple that's out for a romantic evening, maybe wait a few moments before you jump in to get a water order or a wine order, that sort of thing. Let them have their moment if they want it.
One of the nice things about when you present to the table at the beginning is you don't have to say that dreaded line, do you know how the menu works? Or do I need to explain how the menu works? Because there's no menu, so that they're just here for going on for the ride.
Yeah, and I think that was one of my favorite experiences dining was at Puyol in Mexico City. We sat at just did their omakase taco bar, and it was a lot of fun because we just sat down, and it was a very welcoming but a very we're in charge experience. We sat down and they said, we're going to tell you about everything as it comes out. We're not going to give you a menu. It's going to be this many courses, this many beverages. Is that okay? And it was perfect. It's exactly what my friends and I wanted. We're all there just to have fun, and I feel like they read that very well, and something that I try to incorporate into a daily greet or kind of mindset when welcoming people into our space. They might not want the in-depth story with everything. We're here to answer questions and that sort of thing, and we want the guests to feel welcome to ask those questions to us, that if they ask us something, they're not going to feel silly for asking it, and then we'll be able to respond intelligently and make them feel like they learned something and they're having fun.
I'm going to let you get back on the floor. Thanks for your time tonight.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Steve.
So it was interesting how, we talk about, you were saying in the intro to this segment, how sometimes they spend a lot of time talking about the meticulousness in the story and where this came from. And there were two nuns who hand-milked a goat. And then, there was a lot of description. I mean, when you are creating dishes this complicated and advanced and involved, you really do have to explain. I mean, you can't get around that. You have to explain the dish. So it does devolve sometimes into this sort of comical 1.5, 2-minute description.
Well, and who can remember it? That's one of my things, is that once you've said 2 or 3 things, that's kind of all. The guest is there, yes, to enjoy the whole experience and to understand the food a little bit, but they're not going to be taking a test afterwards. So sometimes you have to edit yourself and figure out where to stop and what, and it varies depending on the guest. Like sometimes I will really want to know every detail about a dish because I want to know what's in it and how the chef made it and stuff like that. But somebody at my table might just be saying, "Oh, stop."
And that's the important distinction for a server to understand. Like at Alinea, there was a guy from Miami who was a chef who really wanted to know everything about every component. And then there was the couple from Japan who was just sort of there for the experience, and they wanted to sit back and, so you got to read the customer. Coming up next week, farm-raised versus wild. What are the pros and cons of seafood in a restaurant?
The whole point of this is to take pressure off wild salmon stocks and preserve those for future generations.
You can always contact us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at The Feed Podcast. You can also check out our ingredient challenges, get recipes and other information about previous shows by simply visiting our website, thefeedpodcast.com. And don't forget to subscribe and please rate that show on iTunes. Be sure to follow me at Rick_Bayless.
And to reiterate, please rate the show on iTunes, folks. I'm at Steve Dolinsky. More information about the places we talked about today on our website as well. Linnea Dominic's our production assistant. Max Dolinsky supervised today's music. Bureaucratic wrote and performed our theme song. And the Feed Podcast is edited by Matt Cunningham at Truthful Enthusiasm. Whether you're an individual or institution, get your story online with truthfulenthusiasm.com. Thanks for listening, everybody.